The lawyer cleared his throat. He looked down at the document in his hands, then back up at the man sitting across from him. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked. And in that silence, something shifted in the room. Something invisible but undeniable. Callum Reeves noticed it. He just didn't understand it yet. He was sitting in a leather chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent, wearing a suit he'd bought specifically for this meeting. He had his arms crossed, one leg resting over the other, the posture of a man who believed he had already won. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Brianna Torres, was sitting beside him with a pen poised over her notepad. On the other side of the table sat Maren Halstead. His wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife. The woman he was divorcing. She sat perfectly still. No lawyer beside her yet, just her, a bottle of water she hadn't opened, and a thin manila folder resting beneath her folded hands. Callum expected tears. He expected pleading, maybe an outburst, something messy and emotional. That was how he'd imagined this going. He had planned for that version of events. But Maren wasn't crying. She wasn't even frowning. She was watching him with the quiet patience of someone who had already read the last page of the book. And for just 1 second, one fraction of a second, Callum felt something cold move through him. Then it was gone, and he smiled. He didn't know yet what was in that folder. He didn't know yet what she knew. And he had absolutely no idea what was about to happen to everything he thought was his. If you enjoy stories where someone completely underestimates the wrong person, subscribe, because this one only gets worse for him. And it gets a lot worse. Let's go back. 14 years back. Callum Reeves grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. Not poor, but not comfortable either. His father worked at a distribution center. His mother cleaned houses 3 days a week. They kept the lights on, kept food in the fridge, and that was about the ceiling of what they could promise him. Callum was smart. Ambitious in the way that certain people with nothing become, not from inspiration but from desperation. He didn't want to be his father. He didn't want the distribution center or the house with the leaking roof or the truck that needed work every other month. He wanted something different. He just didn't know how to get there. He met Maren Halstead at 23. She was studying accounting at a community college near where they both lived. She was working 2 jobs at the time, a coffee counter in the mornings, a grocery store in the evenings. She was organized, focused, and so consistently calm that the people around her sometimes forgot she was even in the room. Callum noticed her immediately. Not in the flashy way you see in movies. He noticed her because she was sitting alone at a booth in the back of the cafe where he sometimes went to use the Wi-Fi, and she had a textbook open, a highlighter in one hand, a notebook in the other, and a look on her face like nothing in the world could bother her. He asked if he could sit across from her. She said yes. They talked for 3 hours that first night. He talked about wanting to start a business. She talked about numbers, about structures, about the way small decisions compound into large consequences. She had a way of explaining complex things simply, of breaking problems down until they were just a series of steps. He liked that. He liked her. They started dating. 6 months later, he asked her to move in. Not because he was rushing, because the apartment he was sharing with 2 roommates was costing him too much and Maren's lease was ending. It was practical. That was how they both saw it. Practical. What neither of them saw yet was what they were building. Maren picked up extra shifts that year. She was saving everything she made above her expenses. Not for anything specific. Just saving, the way certain people do when they've grown up understanding that the floor can always drop out. Callum had an idea. He'd been working odd jobs, construction, a brief and terrible stint doing insurance sales, a few months driving for a logistics company. What he kept coming back to was the logistics company. He understood how it worked. He understood where it was inefficient. He believed he could do it better. A smaller operation. Focused. Specialized deliveries for local businesses. No massive overhead, no warehouse, just contracts and reliability. He sat Marin down at their kitchen table one night and laid out his plan. She listened without interrupting. Then she looked at the numbers he'd written down, made a few marks, crossed out 2 assumptions, rewrote them more conservatively, and looked back at him. "It can work," she said. "But you need about $18,000 to start." He didn't have $18,000. She did. Not quite. She had 11,000. But she knew a woman she'd worked with who did small business lending, and she thought, with a solid plan, they could get the rest. Callum looked at her across the table. He asked if she was serious. She said yes. "This would be yours, though," he said. "If we use your money, that makes it yours." She shook her head. "We'll build it together." He nodded. He felt something shift inside him that night, gratitude, warmth, something he would later fail to recognize as the most important moment of his life. The next morning, she started making calls. The name of the company was Reeves Consolidated. Marin chose it. She said it was clean, it was professional, and it would grow well, meaning the name would still fit when the company was bigger than what they were imagining right now. When they filed the paperwork, they were sitting in an attorney's office, a small firm that did basic business registrations for flat fees. The attorney was tired. He was behind on other work. He went through the forms quickly, pointing to lines, asking them to initial here, sign there. One of those lines designated the registered owner of the company. Callum had stepped out to take a call, something about a truck rental, a minor issue that couldn't wait. The attorney didn't pause. He asked who was handling the primary business account. Marin said she was. He put her name on the form. She signed. She initialed. Callum came back in, signed what the attorney slid toward him, didn't read every page, and that was that. It was a minor detail. It felt like nothing. Marin didn't mention it afterward. Not because she was hiding it. Because it simply didn't occur to her that it would ever matter. But some things that feel like nothing are actually everything. And the truth of that line would take 14 years to fully arrive. The early days were brutal. Callum drove the first truck himself. Marin handled all of the invoicing, the contracts, the scheduling, and the bank account. They had 2 clients in their first month. 3 in the second. By month 6, they had a part-time dispatcher. By month 12, they had 3 trucks and a small office in a commercial suite near the edge of town. Callum was good at what he did. He was magnetic with clients. He could walk into a room and make people feel like they were the most important conversation he'd ever had. He built relationships fast. He remembered names, details, small things that made clients feel seen. Marin made sure everything he promised actually happened. She built the systems. She tracked the drivers, managed the contracts, caught mistakes before they became problems. She was the reason the company never failed to deliver on time. She was the reason the company had a reputation. But she was rarely in the room when the compliments arrived. Callum was. That started to matter, slowly, the way most things that eventually destroy something start slowly. By year 3, Reeves Consolidated had 11 trucks and was turning a real profit. By year 5, they were known across the region. By year 7, they had 40 employees, an actual headquarters, and 3 national contracts that Marin had structured personally. They were successful. They were, by any reasonable measure, doing exactly what Callum had sketched out on that kitchen table years ago. Except somewhere along the way, it had stopped feeling like theirs. It had started to feel like his. Success changes people. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It's more like water on stone, you don't see the erosion while it's happening. You only notice it when you look back and realize something essential has worn away. Callum started attending industry events. He joined a business association. He went to conferences. He was on panels. He was in trade publications, photographed smiling, credited as the founder and CEO of Reeves Consolidated. And each time, when someone asked the story of the company, he told it. He told it with Marin's name in it, at first. My wife handles operations. We started this together. But the third year of telling it, we began to quietly shrink. By the fifth year, it was almost entirely I. Marin heard this happen. She was at some of those events, seated slightly off-center, listening to her husband describe their shared history as if he had written the whole thing himself. She didn't correct him. She told herself it was small. She told herself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the company kept running well. That was her first mistake. Not her last. The investors came in year 8. A private equity firm based in Chicago reached out about a minority stake. It wasn't an acquisition, just an infusion of capital that would let them expand into new markets. Callum was thrilled. He set up the meetings. He flew to Chicago twice. He came back each time talking about the future in a way Marin hadn't heard from him since the beginning. That energy, she later admitted to her sister, reminded her of who he used to be. She hoped it meant something. It didn't. The investor meetings introduced Callum to a different world. Private clubs. Rooftop events. Dinners where every person at the table was either the CEO of something or married to one. He came alive in those rooms in a way he didn't at home anymore. He started caring about things he hadn't cared about before. The right watch. The right car. The right neighborhood. Marin noticed. She didn't comment. She was still running the operations of a company that now had 92 employees and was expanding into the Mid-Atlantic region. She didn't have time to manage his ego on top of everything else. And then Sienna Vale came into the picture. She was 28. She worked for the marketing firm that Reeves Consolidated had recently contracted with. She was bright, beautiful, and absolutely fascinated by Callum Reeves in a way that Marin, a woman who had watched him drive his own truck at 2 in the morning and fight with a broken invoice system for 6 hours straight, could not quite replicate. Callum told himself it was professional. He told himself it was just good energy. She was good for the brand. She understood the company's image in a way that was valuable. He started having breakfast meetings with her. Then working dinners. Then the texts started. Late ones. Ones he took in another room. Marin knew. She knew in the way that people who have built their entire life around someone know when something has fractured. You don't need evidence. You feel the geometry of it shift. The angles that used to line up no longer do. She didn't confront him. She started watching. And while she was watching, she was also thinking. Thinking more clearly, in fact, than she had in years. Because when emotion finally fell away, when hurt turned into clarity, the mind becomes extraordinarily sharp. She started reviewing documents she hadn't looked at in a long time. There was a filing cabinet in Marin's home office. She'd always maintained it. Organized by year, by category, every significant document the company had ever generated. Contracts, tax filings, incorporation papers, amendments, addendums. She had a system. She always had a system. She opened it on a Tuesday evening while Callum was at a dinner meeting. She pulled out the original incorporation documents. She'd read them before. Years ago, when they first filed. But she hadn't looked at them since. She read the documents slowly now. Her name was on line 4. Registered owner. Marin Halstead Reeves. She set the document down on her desk. She sat for a long time without moving. Then she picked up her phone and sent a text to her sister, "Are you free Thursday?" She didn't tell Callum what she'd found. She didn't tell anyone except her sister and, 3 days later, a business attorney named Declan Frost, who came highly recommended by someone she'd met at a charitable event 6 years ago and had kept the number of, for no reason she could have named at the time. It turned out there was a reason. It just took a while to arrive. Declan Frost had been practicing business law for 22 years. He had seen plenty of cases involving disputes over company ownership. He had seen ugly divorces. He had seen embezzlement, fraud, partnership collapses. He had seen people discover things in documents that changed their lives overnight. But when Maren Halstead Reeves sat across from him and slid those original incorporation papers across his desk, he looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at her. "Does he know?" Declan asked. "No," Maren said. Declan looked back at the papers. Then at her again. "You've been running the operations of this company the entire time?" "Yes." "And the company's currently valued at?" "Between 40 and 47 million, she said. "Depending on the quarter." Declan set the papers down. He folded his hands on top of them. And then he smiled. Not with satisfaction, but with the particular expression of someone who has just realized they are sitting at the table where history is about to be made. "Mrs. Halstead Reeves," he said. "Do not change anything. Do not move any accounts. Do not say anything to your husband. And come back to see me next week." She nodded. She picked up her water. She drove home. Callum was already in bed when she got there. She didn't wake him. She went into her office, sat down, and opened her laptop. There was a quarterly report to finish. She finished it. She went to bed at midnight. She slept better than she had in months. Callum asked for the divorce on a Saturday morning. He was standing in the kitchen when she came downstairs, and she could see from the way he was standing, arms crossed, weight shifted forward, jaw set, that he had been rehearsing this. He had decided the shape of the conversation before she was even awake. He told her things weren't working. He told her they had grown apart. He said he cared about her but wasn't in love with her anymore. He said all the lines that people say when they want to leave but want to feel like the decent one. Maren listened. She stood very still. She did not cry. She asked him if he was sure. He said he was. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "We should probably get attorneys involved, then." He seemed almost disappointed that she didn't fall apart. He had expected more resistance. He'd told Sienna he expected a scene. He'd already planned what he was going to say when Maren begged him to stay. There was nothing to say. Because Maren didn't beg. She poured herself a glass of water, set it on the counter, and said she was going to call her attorney in the morning. Callum didn't know she already had one. He didn't know she'd been meeting with Declan Frost for 6 weeks. He didn't know that Declan had spent those weeks quietly reviewing every document, every filing, every amendment the company had ever generated, and building a case so airtight it barely needed arguing. Callum left the kitchen. Maren drank her water. And somewhere in a drawer in her home office, beneath a quarterly report and 2 client contracts, sat the original incorporation papers with her name printed clearly on line 4. Registered owner. Maren Halstead Reeves. Brianna Torres, Callum's attorney, was excellent at what she did. She was aggressive, detail-oriented, and had won complex business divorces before. When Callum first explained the situation to her, she was confident. The company was called Reeves Consolidated. He was the public face. He had been the CEO in all of the marketing materials, the press releases, the LinkedIn profile, the investor decks. Marital asset split, she told him during their first meeting. "We can argue you built this equally. You'll get at least 50% of the company valuation. Probably more, given your role." Callum nodded. He was satisfied. He told Sienna that night that it was going to be fine. He didn't know that Brianna Torres hadn't yet seen the incorporation papers. He didn't know that when she did see them, her confidence would fracture so completely that she'd sit in her office for 45 minutes before calling him back. He didn't know any of that yet. He was still, in those weeks, a man who believed he owned everything. The mediation meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday. Callum arrived with Brianna. He wore the suit. He had the posture. He had the ease of a man who has never seriously considered the possibility of loss. Marin arrived with Declan Frost. Declan was quiet. He set a folder on the table. He didn't open it right away. The mediator went through the preliminary steps. Both parties confirmed their identities. Both parties confirmed their desire to proceed. Then the mediator asked both sides to submit their initial documentation regarding company assets. Brianna Torres slid a document across the table. Declan Frost slid one across as well. And then something interesting happened. Brianna Torres looked at Declan's document. She looked at it for a long time. Her pen stopped moving. Callum noticed. He leaned slightly toward her. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. She read the document again. And then she set her pen down on the table and said, in a voice that had lost most of its earlier confidence, "Can we take a 10-minute break?" The break lasted 25 minutes. In the hallway, Brianna Torres explained to Callum Reeves what she had just read. She explained that the original incorporation filing, the one from 14 years ago, had Marin listed as the sole registered owner of Reeves Consolidated. She explained that no subsequent filing had altered that designation. She explained that this meant the company was not, legally speaking, a marital asset in the traditional sense. It was property registered exclusively in Marin's name, with documentation going back to the original founding. Callum stared at her. "That's wrong," he said. "It's the original filing," she said. "We started it together. I was there. I signed papers. You signed as a co-signer on a loan. You signed operating agreements. But the ownership registration," she paused. "Callum, your name isn't on it." He stared. He did not speak. The hallway was very quiet. "What does that mean?" he finally asked. Brianna looked at him steadily. "It means she owns it," she said. "If you've made it this far, comment below what you think he deserves." Because what happens next shocked everyone in that building. Everyone. They went back into the room. Callum sat down. His posture had changed. The crossed arms were gone. He was leaning slightly forward now, his elbows on the table, his face tight in a way it hadn't been an hour ago. Declan Frost opened his folder. He walked through the documentation calmly, the way someone does when they have been waiting a long time to speak and want to make sure every word is heard. The original filing. The subsequent filings. The amendments. Every annual report. Every regulatory submission. Every document going back 14 years carried the same registered owner. Marin Halstead Reeves. Callum interrupted twice. "We built this together," he said. Declan acknowledged that both parties had contributed to the company's growth. "I was the CEO." Declan noted that CEO is a role, not an ownership designation. "She put her name on it without telling me." Declan looked at him. Quietly. He did not raise his voice. He simply said, "The document was signed by both parties in the presence of an attorney. Your client signed on the pages presented to him." The ownership registration was on page 3. Callum turned to look at Marin. For the first time in the meeting, she looked back at him directly. Her face was not triumphant. It was not cold. It was something more difficult to read than either of those things. It was the face of someone who has already grieved and come out the other side of it. "I didn't plan it," she said. "But I'm not going to pretend it isn't true." The room was very quiet. The mediator cleared his throat. Callum tried everything. He hired a second attorney. He argued that 14 years of operating as CEO established de facto ownership. He argued the company's name contained his name and therefore constituted evidence of joint ownership intent. He argued that Marin had fraudulently concealed the ownership structure. Every argument was reviewed. Every argument was rejected. The original documentation was unambiguous. There were no addendums, no amendments, no secondary filings that changed what had been set down on that first day. And Marin had not concealed the document, she had simply never brought it up, which is not concealment when the document was signed in the presence of an attorney with both parties present. His third attorney told him plainly, "You can spend another $200,000 on litigation and still lose. The document is clean." Callum put his phone down on his desk. He sat in his office, the corner office he had moved into 5 years ago, the one with the view of the city, the one with his name on the door, and he sat there without moving for a very long time. He thought about what he had. He was the CEO. He had a salary. He had stock options that, as an employee, he had been granted. But those grants came from the company, which was owned by his wife, who was divorcing him. He had a very clear and very terrible realization about where that left him. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Reeves Consolidated had a small board, 4 members, including Callum as CEO. The private equity firm held 2 seats. 1 independent director held the 4th. Marin requested the meeting. As registered owner of the company, she had that authority. The notice went out formally. Everyone confirmed attendance. Callum attended expecting a negotiation. Some kind of settlement offer, maybe. Some arrangement where he stayed in place and they restructured the ownership going forward. He arrived first. He sat at the head of the table, where he always sat. The other board members came in. The PE firm representatives nodded at him, professionally, without warmth. The independent director looked at the table. Marin came in last. She sat down. She had a folder. She had Declan Frost beside her. She had a composure so complete it was almost architectural. The meeting was called to order. Marin spoke first. She went through the ownership structure. She explained it plainly, the way she had always explained complex things, clearly, without drama, just the facts laid out in sequence until they were impossible to misunderstand. Then she said, "I'm exercising my authority as registered owner to restructure executive leadership." One of the PE firm representatives looked at his colleague. The independent director looked at Marin. Callum said, "You can't do that." "I can," she said. And then she cited the exact provision in the operating agreement. She had written that operating agreement 9 years ago. She had written every word of it. There was a pause that lasted several seconds. Marin slid a document to the center of the table. It was a formal resolution. Leadership restructuring. Effective immediately. "I'm proposing Callum Reeves be moved from CEO to a senior advisory role, pending a structured transition over the next 60 days. The independent director read the document. One of the PE representatives read it. The vote was called. 3-1. The one was Callum. He stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He said, in a voice that was very controlled and very tight, "This isn't over." Marin looked at him. "No," she agreed. "But this part is." He walked out of the conference room. In the hallway, 2 HR representatives were waiting. They explained, professionally and kindly, that his access to the company servers had been adjusted. His company credit cards had been deactivated. His office would be available to him during the transition period, during which he was welcome to participate in an advisory capacity as outlined in the resolution. He stood in the hallway of a company that had his name on it. And he had no more control over it than any stranger walking past the building would. The news traveled fast. That's the thing about the world he'd built for himself in those investor circles, those rooftop events, those industry dinners. It was a small world, and news moved through it like electricity through wire. Within a week, people knew. Not all the details. But enough. The company was Marin's. She was taking control. He was out. The calls he used to get stopped coming. The invitations to events disappeared. Sienna Vale, who had been imagining a life with a wealthy and powerful CEO, had a conversation with Callum that lasted about 40 minutes and ended with her saying she needed space to think. She stopped responding to his messages 4 days later. He sat in his apartment, a rental, now, because the house had been their house and the house had been bought with company funds and the company's financial entanglements were still being untangled. And he sat with his phone in his hand and scrolled through contacts that had quietly gone cold. Maren moved into the corner office. She redecorated it over a weekend. Not dramatically, she wasn't performative about it. She just replaced the few things that had been Callum's aesthetic with her own. Simpler. Less flashy. More functional. She promoted the head of operations, a woman named Trish who had been with the company for 11 years and deserved the title she'd been doing the work of for at least 4 of them. She restructured the marketing contracts. Ended the one with the firm where Sienna worked, which had been overpriced relative to results for 2 years. She hired a smaller boutique firm that had been on her shortlist since the previous spring. She launched the Mid-Atlantic expansion that had been in planning stages for 14 months. By the end of the year, Reeves Consolidated's revenue had grown 19%. The PE firm, which had quietly been uncertain about the leadership transition, sent her a very warm letter after the quarterly numbers came in. She read it, noted it, filed it, and got back to work. Callum tried to reinvent himself. He started telling people he was a consultant. He gave himself a title. Strategic Growth Advisor, and started reaching out to contacts. Some responded. A few even had conversations with him. But something was different now. Because the thing about credibility is that some of it is yours and some of it is borrowed from the institution you represent. And when the institution is gone, you discover very quickly which kind you had. He had counted on the second kind more than he realized. He was 51 years old, sitting in a rental apartment, pitching consulting services to people who remembered him as the CEO of a $47 million company and weren't quite sure what to make of him now. The story he kept telling, about building the company himself, about being the founder, the visionary, had a different sound to it now. Because everyone knew the real story. And in that story, he hadn't built anything alone. Maren Halstead Reeves was named to a regional business leadership board in the spring. She gave a short interview to a trade publication. They asked her about the company's growth under her leadership. They asked about her vision for the next 5 years. They asked, carefully and obliquely, about the changes of the past year. She said this: the company was built by a lot of people over a lot of years. What I've tried to do is make sure the people who actually did the work are recognized and compensated for it. Everything else is just administration. The interviewer, who had done their research, smiled at that answer. Maren did not elaborate. She thanked them for their time and went back to her office where there was a board deck to finish and 3 client calls waiting. Her sister asked her once, during a long dinner conversation over a bottle of wine, whether she was happy. Maren considered the question the way she considered most things, carefully, without rushing. I'm not sure happy is quite the word, she said. I feel correct. Like I'm standing in the right place. Her sister nodded. Do you ever think about what would have happened if he hadn't left? Maren looked at her wine glass. Yes, she said. I think I would have kept standing slightly off-center, watching someone else take credit for things I built. And I think eventually I would have forgotten that that wasn't normal. She paused. So in a strange way. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Callum called her once. About 8 months after the board meeting. It was late on a Tuesday. She saw his name on the screen and she looked at it for a moment before answering. He asked how she was. She said she was well. He asked how the company was doing. She said it was doing well. There was a pause. She could hear him breathing. She could hear him trying to find the right opening for whatever it was he actually wanted to say. I've been thinking, he said finally, about the beginning. About how we started everything. Okay, she said. I think I forgot, he said. Slowly. Carefully. I think I forgot how much of it was you. It was the truest thing he had said in years. Maren sat with it for a moment. I know, she said. Another pause. I'm sorry, he said. She thought about this. I believe you, she said. I think you mean it right now. She did not say anything else. After a moment, he said goodnight. She said goodnight. She set her phone down. She looked at the quarterly projections open on her laptop. She went back to work. Some stories end with a villain destroyed. Some end with a hero celebrated. This one ends the way most true ones do, not with a moment of triumph but with a life, a real life, continuing forward. A company thriving. People well employed in work that means something. A woman in a corner office she earned twice over, once by building the company and once by refusing to let it be taken from her. Callum Reeves didn't lose everything he deserved to keep. He lost the things he had confused for his own. He had confused the title with the foundation. He had confused the face of the company with its bones. And when the divorce papers arrived and the board voted and the corner office changed hands, what was left wasn't tragedy. It was clarity. The clarity that had always been there, in a filing cabinet, in a manila folder, on line 4 of an original document, in letters that spelled out a name. Her name. The name of the person who had been there at the start, who had been there in the middle, who had made sure every promise was kept and every number added up and every contract held. The company grew. The woman grew with it. And the man who had forgotten whose name was on the empire, truly, irreversibly forgotten. Spent a long time afterward learning the cost of that particular kind of carelessness. It was not a lesson that arrived quickly. But it arrived completely. The biggest mistake he ever made was forgetting whose name was on the empire.